The hospital at night had a way of exposing the truth. At 2:43 a.m., the fluorescent lights hummed over empty hallways, and the silence felt heavier than any scream. That was when the doors to the ward burst open. Boots thundered across polished floors. Rifles came up. Patients cried out. Nurses froze. In the middle of the chaos stood a woman in pale blue scrubs. She didn't shout. She didn't run. She simply stepped forward and placed herself between the armed men and a locked hospital room. Her hands trembled, but her eyes didn't. One of the gunmen laughed under his mask. "She's just a night nurse," he said. "Move her." What none of them knew was that they were standing less than 10 feet from someone trained to survive. Ambushes someone who had learned to stay calm when death was inches away. Someone who had buried friends under folded flags. They thought this was a hospital. They were wrong. Before the night was over, every mistake they made would cost them everything. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from and what time it is right now. And if you enjoy powerful, true-style stories like this, consider subscribing. You won't want to miss what happens next. At 2:17 a.m., Mercy Valley Medical Center felt like a place the world had forgotten. The day shift chaos sirens shouting, stretchers colliding in narrow hallways had long faded into memory. Now there was only the soft beep of heart monitors, the distant hiss of oxygen, and the low hum of fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Outside, the parking lot stretched empty for acres, the asphalt glowing faintly under yellow lamps as cold wind swept across it. Emily Carter moved through the fourth-floor surgical ward with quiet efficiency. She was assigned to nights most weeks. Fewer staff, fewer eyes, less noise. That suited her just fine. Her scrubs were neatly pressed, her dark hair pulled into a tight bun at the base of her neck. She walked with a measured pace, not rushed, not slow, each step deliberate, balanced. A clipboard rested lightly in her left hand while her right checked IV lines, adjusted blankets, and noted vitals with practiced ease. Room 412, stable. Room 414, sleeping. Room 417, Emily paused. The monitor inside the room emitted a steady rhythm, but something felt off. She couldn't have explained it if asked. The numbers were normal. Oxygen saturation fine, heart rate steady at 68 beats per minute. Still, she lingered. The patient inside was listed as John Doe, male, mid-40s, admitted after a multi-vehicle collision on Highway 91 2 nights earlier, severe head trauma, currently comatose. But unlike every other patient on the floor, his chart was thin, too thin. No family contact listed, no insurance information, no social history. Even the admitting physician's notes were unusually vague, stripped down to bare clinical language. Emily had noticed it during her shift handoff and asked about it. The day nurse had shrugged. Admin said not to worry about it. Some federal thing, I guess. Federal things had a way of bleeding into places they didn't belong. Emily stepped into the room, her shoes barely making a sound against the linoleum. The man lay still beneath white sheets, his face bruised and partially swollen, a stitched laceration running along his temple. If not for the subtle rise and fall of his chest, he could have passed for already gone. She checked his IV, then glanced instinctively toward the door before she realized she was doing it. A habit. She straightened, exhaling slowly through her nose, forcing herself to relax her shoulders. "You're safe," she murmured quietly, though she wasn't sure whether she meant it for him or for herself. Down the hall, laughter echoed briefly. 2 surgical interns stood near the nurse's station, coffee cups in hand, leaning back against the counter like they owned the place. One of them, Dr. Mason Keller, barely 3 months out of residency, noticed Emily and smirked. "Hey, Carter," he called. "Anything exciting happening in the land of night shift heroics?" Emily didn't look up from her chart. "Vitals are stable." "That's a no, then." Mason chuckled and took a sip of his coffee. "Must be nice. Quiet floors. Easy work. Easy." Emily's pen paused for half a second, then resumed moving. Across the ward, Frank Donnelly, the overnight security guard, strolled past with a flashlight swinging loosely from his hand. He was pushing 60 belly straining against his uniform, his radio clipped crookedly to his shoulder. "Another peaceful night," he said cheerfully as he passed Emily. "Let's keep it that way, yeah," she offered a polite smile. "Let's." Frank continued down the hallway, humming to himself. Emily watched him go until he turned the corner and disappeared from view. Her smile faded. She returned to the nurse's station, logging updates into the system. The digital clock on the wall ticked over to 2:29 a.m. That was when the cameras flickered. The small security monitor mounted above the desk glitched the image, distorting for half a second before snapping back into focus. One of the interns frowned. "Did you see that Emily had already noticed?" A second later, the screen flickered again, this time longer. The feed from the west stairwell blurred into static. "That's weird," Mason muttered. "Probably nothing. Probably." Emily's gaze lingered on the monitor. Her fingers tightened slightly around the edge of the desk. "Security sometimes runs maintenance overnight," she said calmly. Mason nodded, already losing interest. "Figures." But Emily didn't look away. She watched as the feed from the loading bay camera froze entirely. No static, no movement. Just a still frame of an empty concrete corridor. Her pulse ticked up, not fast, not panicked, just enough to register. She stood and walked toward the hallway window, overlooking the ambulance entrance. The glass reflected the ward behind her, pale and sterile. Outside, the night was darker than it should have been. No ambulances, no flashing lights, just shadow. Emily leaned slightly closer to the glass, scanning the lot. A cold draft brushed the back of her neck, raising fine hairs along her arms. Her radio crackled suddenly. Anyone copy?" Frank's voice came through, distorted. "I've got something odd near." Static swallowed the rest. Emily straightened instantly. "Frank," she said into her handheld. "Repeat that." "Nothing." Mason looked up, frowning. "Probably a dead zone." Emily didn't respond. She was already moving. Her steps were quick now, but still controlled. She passed patient rooms, her eyes tracking reflections in glass doorways, corners. At the stairwell, she paused, listening. Footsteps echoed faintly below, not hurried, measured. Emily pressed her back lightly against the wall, heart beating steady and strong in her chest. She told herself it was nothing. Late-night deliveries. Contractors. 100 reasonable explanations. Still, her hand drifted unconsciously to her wrist fingers, brushing a faint scar hidden beneath her sleeve. She withdrew her hand, forcing it to relax. From downstairs came the unmistakable sound of metal scraping against metal. A door being forced open. Emily closed her eyes for a brief moment, then opened them again. "Not tonight," she whispered. She turned and headed back toward the ward, not to raise an alarm, not to run for help, but to do what she had always done when something felt wrong. She checked her exits. She counted her patients. She prepared. Behind her, out of sight, the stairwell door swung open slowly. Emily reached the ward just as the automatic doors at the far end clicked open. She didn't hear shouting. Not yet. What she heard instead was worse, the quiet, deliberate sound of people who knew exactly where they were going. 3 figures emerged from the corridor leading up from the service elevators. At first glance, they looked almost ordinary. Dark jackets, baseball caps pulled low. One of them wore a reflective vest like the ones EMTs sometimes threw on during late-night transfers. A stretcher rolled between them, its wheels whispering across the floor. Almost ordinary. Emily slowed her pace, forcing herself not to stare. She had learned long ago that danger often announced itself not with noise, but with details that didn't quite fit. The stretcher was empty. The man pushing it moved too smoothly, his posture too upright for someone used to hauling patients through hospital corridors. The second man scanned doorways as they advanced, his eyes sharp, alert, never lingering too long in one place. The third walked slightly behind, one hand tucked beneath his jacket, elbow angled wrong. Emily felt it then unmistakably. The same pressure she used to feel just before a patrol went bad. She stepped aside as if to give them room to pass, lowering her gaze, becoming exactly what they expected her to be. Just a night nurse. "Evening," she said, casually nodding toward the empty stretcher. "You guys lost a patient." The man in front smiled. It was quick and tight, not reaching his eyes. "Transfer," he said. "ICU called it in." Emily tilted her head slightly. ICU's 2 floors down. Elevators are on the other side. A pause, barely half a second, but long enough. "New protocol," the man replied. "Cuts through here." Emily nodded, stepping back. "Of course." They rolled past her. As they did, the edge of the reflective vest shifted just enough for her to see what was clipped beneath it. Not a radio. A firearm. Her pulse remained steady, her breathing slow. But inside, the pieces clicked into place with chilling clarity. She waited until they were several yards away before turning back toward the nurse's station. Mason Keller was still there, scrolling through his phone. "Hey," Emily said evenly. "Did anyone call down about a transfer?" Mason barely looked up. "Nope." Her fingers tightened around her clipboard. "Did admin say anything about contractors or security drills?" He snorted. "At this hour, no chance." Emily leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Mason, listen to me carefully. I need you to stay here and keep patients in their rooms. If anyone tries to leave, stop them." Now he looked up, irritation flickering across his face. "Why? What's going on? I'll explain later." That's not an answer. Emily met his gaze. Something in her eyes made him stop talking. "Okay," he said slowly. "What about security? I'm going to find Frank." She turned before he could ask more questions. Down the hallway, the men had stopped outside room 417. John Doe's room. Emily's jaw tightened. She quickened her pace, footsteps still light, still controlled. As she rounded the corner, she saw one of the men pull a handheld device from his pocket, something small, rectangular, with a blinking green light. A signal jammer. That explained the cameras. The radios. Frank. Emily's mind raced, calculating distances, exits, risks. She had no weapon. No backup she could rely on, not yet. Raising a general alarm now would send patients flooding into the hall straight into danger. She needed time. She stepped into view. "Sir," she said firmly, authority sharpening her tone. "You can't be here." The man closest to her turned, annoyance flashing across his face. "Move along, nurse." "This patient is under restricted observation," Emily continued. "You don't have clearance." The second man laughed softly. "We have all the clearance we need." He reached beneath his jacket and withdrew his pistol, not pointing it yet, but letting her see it clearly. Now he said, "You're going to open that door." Emily swallowed, letting fear rise just enough to look real. I can't," she stammered. "I don't have the key." The first man stepped closer, looming over her. He smelled faintly of oil and metal. "You're lying." Her heart hammered once harder this time, but she forced herself not to step back. "I swear," she said. "Only admin has access." The third man sighed impatiently. "We don't have time for this." He grabbed her arm. The grip was strong, practiced. Most people would have yelped, tried to pull away. Emily didn't. She felt the angle of his wrist, the pressure of his thumb, the slight imbalance in his stance. She could break it, easily. Instead, she froze. "Please," she whispered, letting her voice shake. "You're hurting me." The man smirked, tightening his grip. "Good." Behind him, the door to room 417 beeped softly as the first man began overriding the lock. Emily's gaze flicked to the hallway beyond them. Empty. Too empty. Patients had gone quiet, as if sensing something wrong. The ward held its breath. Her mind flashed back, not in images, but sensations. Cold air, mud under boots, the weight of a rifle against her shoulder, the voice of a sergeant whispering, "Wait for the moment. Not before, not after." She had sworn she was done with that life, but it wasn't done with her. Last chance, the man holding her said, "Make a sound and I drop you." Emily's lips parted. She didn't scream. She looked him in the eye and said calmly, "You already made your first mistake." He frowned. "What?" At the far end of the hall, a door slammed open. "Emily." Mason's voice echoed sharp with panic. He skidded to a stop, eyes locking onto the gun. Everything happened at once. The man holding Emily shoved her aside and raised his weapon toward Mason. The override beeped again as the lock on room 417 clicked free. Emily moved. Not like a nurse. Not like a civilian. She pivoted on the ball of her foot, slipping inside the gunman's reach, her forearm snapping up to deflect the muzzle just as it fired. The shot shattered a light fixture, plunging half the hallway into darkness. She drove her elbow into his throat. Hard. He collapsed, choking weapon, clattering to the floor. For a split second, the other two men stared at her, shock written plainly across their faces. Emily stood between them and the room, chest rising and falling, eyes cold and focused. Mason stared, too frozen in place. "What the hell?" he whispered. The second man recovered first, raising his gun toward her. On the ground, he shouted. Emily didn't move. Behind them, somewhere deep in the hospital, a distant thumping sound began to build, low and rhythmic, like rotors cutting through the night air. Emily allowed herself the faintest, tightest smile. "Kneel," she said quietly. "Now." They didn't, and that was their second mistake. The hallway erupted into motion. The second gunman fired. Emily dropped instantly, not backward, not sideways, but straight down, letting gravity do the work as the bullet tore through the space where her head had been a fraction of a second earlier. The shot cracked against the wall behind her, spraying plaster and sparks. She rolled, coming up on one knee, scooping the fallen weapon off the floor in one smooth motion. Mason screamed. "Get down!" Emily shouted, her voice sharp, unmistakably commanding. Mason didn't argue. He hit the floor hard, scrambling behind a supply cart as another gunshot thundered down the hall. Patients began to cry out now. Doors rattled as confused, terrified voices rose behind them. Someone sobbed. Someone else prayed. The third man swore loudly and lunged for the door to room 417, shoving past his partner. "No," Emily barked. She fired once, low, precise. The bullet punched into the floor inches from his foot. He stumbled back with a curse slipping on the polished linoleum. For a brief, surreal moment, everything froze. Emily stood in the center of the ward hospital, scrubs streaked with dust, a gun steady in her hands. Her eyes flicked from threat to threat, tracking angles, calculating risk. She was breathing hard now, but controlled, 4 seconds in, 4 seconds out. The men stared at her like she'd risen from the dead. "You said she was just a nurse," one of them shouted. "She was the leader," snapped back. Until she wasn't. Emily backed toward the wall, positioning herself between them and the patient rooms. She didn't chase. She didn't rush. She held ground. A nurse burst out of room 414, panic etched across her face. "Emily, what's back inside?" Emily ordered without turning. "Lock the door. Stay down." The nurse obeyed instantly, slamming the door shut. The leader's gaze flicked from Emily to the locked patient room and back again. His jaw tightened. "We don't want a massacre," he said. "Step aside and nobody else gets hurt." Emily laughed once, a short, humorless sound. "You brought rifles into a hospital," she said. That ship sailed. Behind her, the rhythmic thumping grew louder. Whoomp, whoomp, whoomp. The men noticed it too. One of them glanced upward, eyes widening. "Is that helicopter?" the third man muttered. "That's not news." Emily's eyes never left them. "It's not news," she agreed softly. "It's worse." The leader's hand trembled slightly as he adjusted his grip on the gun. "Who the hell are you?" Emily didn't answer. She didn't need to. A sudden metallic clang echoed from the stairwell behind them, followed by raised voices, security shouting, then abruptly falling silent. The jammer blinked red, then died with a faint electronic whine. The lights flickered and came back brighter. The leader cursed. "We're out of time." He lunged. Emily fired again, this time at the wall beside his head. The impact showered him with debris, stopping him cold. "Drop it," she said. Final warning. He hesitated. In that hesitation, Mason found his voice. "Emily," he whispered hoarsely from behind the cart. "Police are on their way." I triggered the alarm." "Good," Emily thought. Too late, but good. The leader's lips peeled back in a snarl. "You think you've won?" "No," Emily said honestly. "I think you've lost." The third man suddenly bolted, sprinting toward the emergency stairwell. Emily reacted without thinking. She turned and threw the gun, not at him, but at the wall-mounted fire alarm. The casing shattered under the impact, and the alarm screamed to life, red lights strobing as sirens wailed throughout the floor. The man skidded to a stop, hands flying to his ears. "Damn it," he yelled. The noise was deafening now. Patients cried louder. Doors banged open and shut as nurses ushered people back inside. The leader took a step backward, eyes darting. That was when a voice boomed through the ward's PA system. "This is a federal facility under emergency control. Drop your weapons and get on the ground." The voice was calm, flat, absolute. Emily recognized it instantly. So did the men. The leader's face drained of color. "That's not local PD." "No," Emily said. "It's not." The third man's hands shook as he lowered his gun. "We weren't supposed to trigger this." The leader looked at Emily again, really looked at her this time. At the stance. The eyes. The way she hadn't once asked for mercy. "You're military," he said quietly. Emily said nothing. "Special forces," he continued almost to himself. "That's the only thing that makes sense." The helicopter thundered closer, the vibration rattling ceiling tiles. Dust drifted down from above. Outside the windows, powerful white lights swept across the ward. The leader exhaled sharply and made a decision. He raised his weapon not at Emily, but at the locked door to room 417. "If we don't get him," he snarled, "none of this matters." He fired. The bullet struck the door frame, splintering wood and metal. Emily moved faster than she thought possible. She crossed the distance between them in 3 strides, slamming into him shoulder first. They crashed to the floor together, the gun skittering away. He swung wildly, catching her jaw with his fist. Pain exploded behind her eyes, sharp and blinding. She welcomed it. Pain meant she was still in the fight. She rolled, locking her legs around his arm, twisting hard. Something popped. He screamed. Emily released him and scrambled to her feet, snatching the fallen weapon again. "Hands on your head," she said, breath ragged. "Face down. Now." The third man obeyed instantly, dropping flat. The leader lay groaning on the floor, clutching his arm. Sirens wailed closer. Real ones now. Police. Federal units. Mason crawled out from behind the cart, staring at Emily like he'd never seen her before. Who are you?" he asked. Emily didn't look at him. She was watching the door to room 417, watching the man inside, still breathing, still alive, watching the last place in this hospital that truly mattered tonight. Outside, boots pounded across the roof. Metal scraped against concrete. The helicopter settled onto the helipad with a deafening roar. Emily closed her eyes for one brief second. Then she opened them and turned toward the sound, because she knew without a doubt that this night was far from over. The helicopter's roar settled into a heavy, relentless thunder above the ward, vibrating through bone and glass. Ceiling tiles rattled. A few cracked and dropped dust onto the floor. The red emergency lights continued to pulse, bathing everything in an unreal, blood-tinged glow. Emily stood motionless in the center of it all. Her hands still shook, not from fear, but from the effort of keeping control. Adrenaline flooded her system, sharp and familiar, dragging old instincts back to the surface like ghosts that refused to stay buried. Boots echoed from the stairwell. Not rushed, not panicked, professional. A squad of armed men in dark tactical gear poured onto the floor, weapons raised, movements clean and coordinated. Their patches were deliberately unremarkable, their faces set in the same calm mask Emily had worn 1,000 times before. Federal, clear left, clear right, targets down. They swept the hallway in seconds, securing the wounded gunmen, snapping restraints onto wrists, checking pulses with the same efficiency they might have checked weapons. Emily lowered the gun slowly and placed it on the floor before anyone asked her to. A man with a captain's insignia stepped forward, his gaze sharp and assessing. He took in the shattered lights, the blood on the floor, the unconscious gunman gasping for air. Then his eyes settled on Emily. They lingered there, for just a fraction of a second longer than necessary. "Ma'am," he said, carefully stepped back from the weapon. Emily complied, raising her hands, palms open. "I'm unarmed," she said evenly. The captain studied her face, the bruise already forming along her jaw. The way she stood, feet shoulder-width apart, weight centered, ready. "You stopped them," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." With no backup. "Yes." He exhaled slowly and nodded once. "Understood." Behind him, 2 agents approached the door to room 4, 17 weapons lowered but ready. One of them glanced back at Emily. "Is the patient stable?" Emily's jaw tightened. "He's alive," she said. "That's all I can guarantee." They moved to the door and unlocked it with a code Emily had never been given access to. The door slid open. Inside, John Doe lay exactly where Emily had left him. Machines beeped steadily. His chest rose and fell beneath the sheets, oblivious to how close he had come to dying. The agents entered, positioning themselves on either side of the bed. "Asset, secure," one of them said quietly into his mic. "Asset, not patient." Emily felt something cold settle in her stomach. The captain turned back to her. "We need to ask you a few questions." She nodded. "Of course." Mason staggered to his feet nearby, his face pale, eyes wide. "Questions," he echoed. She saved the whole floor. The captain acknowledged him with a brief glance. "And we're grateful. But there are protocols." Emily caught the unspoken words. People like her weren't supposed to exist quietly. They escorted her away from the ward to a small conference room near the nurses' station. The door closed behind them with a soft click, cutting off the chaos outside. The room smelled faintly of disinfectant and stale coffee. A single table, 4 chairs. Emily sat. The captain remained standing, arms folded. "Emily Carter," he said, reading from a tablet. "Licensed registered nurse. Employed here for 18 months. No prior incidents. No disciplinary actions." He looked up. Clean record. She met his gaze without flinching. "Before that," he continued, "there's a gap. She said nothing. A 4-year gap, he pressed. No employment records. No schooling. No civilian address. Emily inhaled slowly through her nose. I took time off, she said. The captain's lips twitched. That's not how this works. He tapped the tablet again. Because when we ran your prints just now, standard procedure, we got a hit. Mason stiffened behind her. You ran her prints. The captain ignored him. Emily Carter doesn't exist in any military database, he said. But Emily Carter isn't the name we found. The air in the room felt suddenly thinner. Emily closed her eyes for half a second. When she opened them, something in her expression had changed, not fear, not defiance, but resignation. Emily Carter is my legal name, she said quietly. The captain nodded. Now it is. He turned the tablet toward her. On the screen was a photograph taken years earlier. Same eyes, shorter hair, dirt-smudged face. A uniform instead of scrubs. Under the photo, a different name stared back at her. Sergeant Emily Carter, U.S. Army Rangers. Mason let out a sound somewhere between a gasp and a curse. Ranger, he whispered. Your Emily didn't look at him. The captain's voice softened just a little. We don't see many of you leave quietly. I didn't leave quietly, Emily said. I left. After a classified operation went sideways in Kandahar, he said. 2 Rangers killed. 1 captured. You were the last one out. Emily's jaw clenched. That mission doesn't exist, she replied. He met her gaze evenly. Not on paper. Silence stretched between them. Finally, Emily spoke. I didn't come here to hide, she said. I came here to heal. People. Myself. I followed every rule. I didn't use my training. Not until tonight. And tonight, the captain said gently, you disarmed 3 armed assailants in a hospital hallway. She didn't deny it. Mason shook his head slowly. All this time. You let us treat you like a nurse, Emily cut in, turning to him at last. That's what I am. The captain cleared his throat. There's more. He tapped the tablet again, pulling up a classified file. John Doe isn't his real name either, he said. He's a former defense contractor turned whistleblower. He exposed a weapons diversion ring tied to a private military firm. Emily's eyes narrowed. The men who came for him, the captain continued, weren't random. They were hired, well-funded, and very motivated. And you didn't move him sooner, Emily said flatly. We underestimated how fast the leak would spread, he admitted. That's on us. She leaned back in her chair, exhaling sharply. So what happens now? She asked. The captain studied her for a long moment. Now he said we have to decide what to do with you. Mason bristled. What do you mean, do with her? The captain ignored him again. You intervened in a federal protection operation, he said to Emily. You exposed your identity, and you demonstrated capabilities that raise concerns. Emily's gaze hardened. I saved lives. Yes, he said. And because of that, some very powerful people are going to start asking questions. He lowered his voice. People who won't like the answers. Emily felt the weight of that settle on her shoulders. She had known this moment would come someday. She just hadn't expected it to find her in scrubs, standing in a hospital hallway at 2 a.m. Outside the room, a commotion broke out. Raised voices, hurried footsteps. An agent burst through the door. Sir, he said urgently. The patient, he's awake. Emily was already on her feet. What she demanded. The agent hesitated. And he's asking for you. The captain's eyes snapped to hers. For you, he repeated slowly. Emily felt a chill crawl up her spine. Because suddenly the question wasn't just who John Doe was. It was how he knew her. The hallway outside room 417 felt narrower than before. Emily walked between 2 federal agents, their presence steady but not threatening, weapons lowered yet ready. The alarms had been silenced, but the aftershock lingered in the air, sharp, metallic charged. Nurses whispered behind closed doors. Patients stared through narrow windows, eyes wide, trying to piece together what they'd just survived. At the threshold of the room, the agents paused. Inside, the machine still beeped in calm clinical rhythms. The man on the bed was awake, now eyes open, unfocused, but alert enough to track movement. His breathing was shallow. His hands trembled faintly against the sheets. Emily stopped just inside the doorway. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then the man's gaze locked onto her face and something unmistakable passed between them. Recognition. "Emily," he rasped. Her blood ran cold. The captain stiffened behind her. "How does he know your name?" Emily didn't answer. She took 2 steps closer to the bed, her eyes never leaving the man's. "That's not my name," she said quietly. "Not the one you knew." A faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, painful and fleeting. "It's the one you chose." The room seemed to shrink. "Everyone out," Emily said suddenly. The captain hesitated. "That's not. Please," she added, her voice low but firm. 2 minutes. The captain studied her face, then the man on the bed. Finally he nodded. 2 minutes, he said. "I'll be right outside." The agents withdrew the door, sliding shut with a soft hiss. Silence settled. Emily pulled a chair closer and sat leaning forward, forearms resting on her thighs. "Talk," she said, "before I lose my patience." The man swallowed. "You always hated small talk." Her jaw tightened. "How do you know me?" he coughed, wincing. "Because you saved my life once, in Kandahar." The word landed like a punch. Emily looked away, her eyes fixing on the far wall. "That place doesn't exist." "It exists," he said weakly. "Just not officially." She closed her eyes, memories pressing at the edges of her control, dust storms shouting, blood soaking into sand. "You were there," she said. "You weren't supposed to be." "I was embedded," he replied. "Contractor, intelligence liaison. And when the ambush happened, you dragged me out." Her hands curled into fists. "You weren't a ranger," she said bitterly. "You were dead weight." A soft, humorless laugh escaped him. "Fair." She leaned closer now, her voice dropping. "My team died covering that extraction. 2 of them. 1 captured." His expression darkened. "I know." "You don't know," Emily snapped. "You don't know what it's like to carry that." "I carry my own ghosts," he said quietly, "because what I learned after that mission, it's why they want me dead." Emily searched his face for lies and found none. "You saw something," she said. "I documented everything," he replied. "Weapons rerouted, funds laundered, orders signed by people who still sit behind polished desks." Emily leaned back slowly, understanding dawning. "That's why you were hidden here," she murmured. "That's why they came." He nodded. "They thought you were just another nurse." "So did I," she said bitterly. He met her gaze again. "You tried to disappear. I don't blame you." Emily stood abruptly, pacing once, then turning back. "You don't get to absolve me." "I'm not trying to," he said. "I'm asking for your help. One last time." She laughed sharply. "You've got federal protection. A helicopter on the roof. An entire alphabet soup watching you breathe. And yet he said they got this close." Emily stopped pacing. "What do you want from me?" she asked. He hesitated. "When they move me, it won't be safe." "Not completely. Someone inside the system is feeding them information." Emily's eyes hardened. "You're saying there's a leak?" "I'm saying," he replied carefully, "that I trust you more than anyone wearing a badge right now." Silence stretched between them. Finally, Emily exhaled long and slow. "I'm not a ranger anymore," she said. "I don't take missions." He nodded. "I know. That's why I asked you." The door slid open. The captain stepped back inside, reading the tension instantly. "Time's up." Emily turned to him. "He's compromised," she said. "Your protection detail too." The captain frowned. "That's a serious accusation." "It's a serious situation," Emily shot back. "They found him here. Someone told them." The captain's jaw tightened. "We're moving him to a secure site immediately, and announcing it through the same channels that got him nearly killed," she countered. He stared at her, weighing options. Mason appeared in the doorway behind him, pale but determined. "She's right," he said quietly. "Those men knew exactly where to go." The captain sighed. "This is above all of our pay grades." "Then listen to someone who survived being hunted," Emily said. The captain studied her for a long moment. "Fine," he said finally. "We'll alter the transfer plan. Minimal disclosure." Emily nodded. "And I go with him." The captain blinked. "Absolutely not." She met his gaze evenly. "Then you'll lose him. You're not cleared," he argued. "I'm the reason he's alive," she shot back. "And you know it." Another pause. Outside, the helicopter rotors slowed, the sound fading into an uneasy quiet. The captain rubbed a hand over his face. "This isn't how it's supposed to go." "It never is," Emily replied. He looked from her to the man on the bed, then back again. "Temporary civilian escort," he said at last. "Unofficial." Off the books. Emily nodded once. That's how I like it. As the agents began preparing the transfer, Mason stepped closer to her, lowering his voice. You're really leaving? He asked. For a little while, Emily said. He swallowed. You're coming back, right? She glanced down the hall, the ward she'd fought for, the place she'd tried to rebuild herself in. I don't know, she admitted. But tonight proved something. What's that? She met his eyes. You can't outrun who you are. You can only decide what you use it for. As they wheeled the bed toward the elevators, Emily took one last look at the quiet ward. She had tried to be invisible. Tonight had torn that illusion apart. And whatever came next, she knew one thing for certain. The hardest part of this fight hadn't even begun yet. The service elevator doors slid shut with a hollow metallic thud. Emily stood at the head of the gurney, one hand gripping the rail, the other resting lightly near the patient's shoulder. 2 federal agents flanked them, faces, expressionless eyes, scanning the ceiling cameras as the elevator began its slow descent. No one spoke. The silence inside the metal box felt heavier than gunfire. John Doe, no Michael Reeves, she reminded herself, now turned his head slightly toward her. His voice was barely above a whisper. You didn't have to come. Emily didn't look at him. Yes, she said. I did. The elevator hummed past the 3rd floor. One of the agents shifted his weight, fingers brushing his earpiece. Emily caught the movement instantly. Her muscles tensed not outwardly, but deep coiling. Problem? She asked calmly. The agent hesitated, just checking perimeter updates. Emily's gaze flicked to the mirrored wall of the elevator, catching the faint reflection of his eyes. They didn't look reassured. The elevator slowed. A soft chime sounded. The doors opened onto the underground transfer corridor, a long, narrow passage connecting the hospital to the ambulance bay. Fluorescent lights cast a sterile white glow over concrete walls. The air smelled of oil, rubber, and disinfectant. Too clean, too quiet. Emily stepped out first, her senses already stretching, mapping the space. The corridor curved gently to the right, disappearing from view. At the far end, the loading doors stood closed, a sliver of night visible beneath them. Ambulances staged outside, one agent said. We'll move fast. Emily nodded. We should. They began pushing the gurney forward. Each footstep echoed sharp and isolated. Halfway down the corridor, Emily felt it again, that pressure, that unmistakable tightening in her chest. The feeling that something was wrong, not because of what she saw, but because of what she didn't. No security detail, she asked casually. Pulled back to reduce exposure, the agent replied. Less people, less risk. Emily stopped walking. The gurney rolled another foot before halting. Say that again, she said. The agent turned. Emily raised a hand, cutting him off. Less people doesn't mean less risk, she said quietly. It means fewer witnesses. The second agent stiffened. Ma'am, keep moving. Emily's eyes flicked to the ceiling. The camera above them was dark. She exhaled slowly. Hands off the gurney, she said. The first agent frowned. Excuse me, now, Emily repeated, her voice low, steady, unmistakably dangerous. Michael Reeves looked between them, confusion sharpening into fear. Emily. The agent closest to the gurney reached for his sidearm. Emily moved. She stepped in close, trapping his arm against his body before the weapon cleared its holster. Her forearm drove into his throat, pinning him against the wall. At the same time, she kicked backward, her heel slamming into the knee of the second agent with a sickening crack. He went down with a shout. The first agent struggled, choking his face, turning red. Emily leaned in her mouth near his ear. Who sent you? She asked. His eyes bulged. He didn't answer. She twisted hard. His body went limp. Emily let him drop and turned just as the loading doors at the end of the corridor burst open. Cold night air rushed in. So did the men. 3 figures in tactical gear surged inside, rifles up, movements sharp and aggressive. Not police, not military. Their gear was mismatched, unmarked, private. Get away from the asset, one of them shouted. Emily planted herself between them and the gurney. No, she said. A muzzle flashed. The bullet slammed into the concrete inches from her foot, fragments biting into her ankle. She didn't flinch. You don't want to do this, she called out, her voice cutting cleanly through the chaos. You're already late. The men hesitated just a beat too long. Emily reached up and yanked the emergency release lever on the wall. The loading bay lights went out. Darkness swallowed the corridor. Gunfire erupted, wild and panicked. Bullets ricocheted off concrete sparks, lighting the black like lightning. Emily dropped low, rolling beneath the gurney, pulling it sideways with her as rounds tore through the space where Michael's head had been seconds earlier. "Stay down," she barked. Michael did. Emily rose on the other side of the gurney, using it as cover. Her mind raced, calculating angles, distances. She had no weapon, only speed, surprise, and the narrow corridor working in her favor. She lunged forward, closing the distance before the nearest gunman could adjust. Her elbow smashed into his jaw, snapping his head sideways. She wrenched the rifle free and drove the butt into his chest, sending him sprawling. The second man fired blindly. Emily ducked the round, grazing her shoulder, heat flaring as fabric tore. She ignored it. She pivoted, firing once controlled, precise. The gunman dropped, screaming, clutching his leg. The third hesitated. That was all the opening she needed. Emily advanced, rifle steady. "Back away," she said. Slowly. He took one step back, then another. Behind him, rotors thundered. The helicopter. The man glanced over his shoulder and bolted. Emily fired again, the shot cracking through the corridor. He went down hard, sliding across the concrete and coming to rest just feet from the open bay. Silence crashed down, broken only by the distant chop of blades and Michael's ragged breathing. Emily lowered the rifle slowly. Her shoulder burned. Blood soaked through her scrubs. She barely noticed. Boots pounded toward them from behind, real ones this time. Federal agents flooded the corridor, weapons raised, shouting commands. "Hands up!" Emily dropped the rifle and raised her arms. "Secure the patient," she shouted back. "2 compromised agents. 3 hostile contractors down." The captain emerged from the crowd, eyes wide as he took in the scene. "My God," he muttered. "You were right." Emily met his gaze, chest heaving. "You still doubt me?" He shook his head. "Not anymore." The agents moved fast, securing the wounded men, checking pulses, slapping cuffs on wrists. One of them approached Emily. "You're hit." She glanced down at her shoulder. "I'll live." The captain looked at her for a long moment. Then he said quietly, "This goes deeper than we thought." Emily nodded. "It always does." They transferred Michael onto a new gurney, this time surrounded by twice the security, and rushed him toward the waiting helicopter. As they moved, Michael reached out weakly, gripping Emily's sleeve. "They won't stop," he said. "Even after tonight." Emily squeezed his hand. "Then neither will I." The helicopter doors slammed shut. The rotors roared louder, wind whipping through the bay, as the aircraft lifted into the night sky, carrying Michael away. Emily stood there, bloodied and breathing hard, watching until it vanished into darkness. The captain stepped beside her. "You could have stayed invisible," he said. "You chose not to." Emily finally allowed herself to feel the ache in her bones, the weight of everything she'd been holding back. "I didn't choose this," she replied. "They did." He nodded slowly. "What happens now?" Emily turned away from the bay toward the hospital above the ward, the patients, the life she'd tried to build. "Now," she said, "we find out who's pulling the strings." And somewhere deep inside the system, someone was already realizing they'd made a catastrophic miscalculation. The helicopter vanished into the night like a swallowed secret. Emily stood in the loading bay long after the rotors faded, the concrete still vibrating beneath her boots. Floodlights cast hard shadows across the scene, cuffed contractors on the ground, federal agents moving with clipped urgency, medics kneeling beside the wounded. The smell of jet fuel mixed with blood and disinfectant sharp enough to sting the back of her throat. The captain approached, his voice lowered. "We've locked the hospital down. FBI Joint Task Force is inbound." Emily nodded, rolling her shoulder once. Pain flared hot and bright, then dulled to a manageable throb. She had learned how to compartmentalize pain years ago. Tonight was not the time to feel it. "Your 2 agents?" she asked. "Alive," he said, "and talking. Not by choice." Her eyes flicked to the darkened cameras overhead. They weren't freelancers. "No," he admitted. "They were placed. Years ago." Emily let that sink in. "Then you've got a rot problem," he grimaced. At the root, they moved back upstairs through secured corridors, agents posted at every junction. The ward looked smaller, now fragile after the violence that had ripped through it. Nurses huddled near the station, faces pale. Mason stood among them, his hands shaking as he tried and failed to hide it. When he saw Emily, relief broke through the shock. "You're bleeding." "I'm fine," she said, though the lie tasted thin. "You're not," he insisted, stepping closer. You took a round. She held his gaze. Check on the patients. He swallowed and nodded, backing away. An older nurse reached out, touching Emily's arm gently. Thank you, she whispered. Emily didn't answer. Gratitude made her uncomfortable. It always had. They guided Emily into a private office. The captain closed the door and leaned against it, rubbing his temples. We intercepted a call, he said. Contractors were promised extraction. Clean, quiet. Emily crossed her arms. They weren't here for a shootout. No, he agreed. They were here to erase a problem. Michael Reeves, she said. And anyone who got in the way. Emily's eyes hardened. Including patients. The captain nodded once. We're tracing the money now. A knock came at the door. An agent stepped in, urgency etched across his face. Sir, you need to see this. They moved to the operations room, a temporary command center set up near the ER. Screens glowed with live feeds and data streams. On one monitor, a name scrolled across in bold letters, Project Nightfall. Emily's stomach tightened. Say it, she said. The captain swallowed. It's a shell. Weapons diversion, false contracts, black budget laundering. Reeves had the ledger. And the signatures, Emily asked. The agent pointed to another screen. A list of names appeared redacted in places familiar in others. Generals, contractors, elected officials. Emily's jaw clenched. They'll bury this. They tried, the captain said quietly. They underestimated Reeves. And they underestimated you. A siren wailed faintly outside. Somewhere below, an ambulance pulled in. Life went on even as the truth clawed its way to the surface. The captain turned to her. There's one more thing. He nodded toward a feed from the helipad camera. Federal SUVs screeched into frame. Doors opened. A man stepped out, flanked by armed escorts. His bearing was unmistakable, tall, composed, the weight of command in every step. Emily recognized him instantly. Her breath caught. General, she said. General Robert Hale, the captain confirmed. Chairman of the Oversight Committee. Emily's pulse quickened, not with fear but with a cold, focused clarity. Hale had signed off on budgets tied to Kandahar. He had stood behind a podium and spoken about honor. He's not here for congratulations, she said. No, the captain replied. He's here to contain damage. The door opened again. The general entered the room without ceremony, his eyes scanning faces until they landed on Emily. He studied her for a long moment, something unreadable passing across his expression. Emily Carter, he said. Or should I say Sergeant? She met his gaze. Sir. At ease, he said automatically, then stopped himself. You're a civilian now. Am I? She asked. A murmur rippled through the room. The general's jaw tightened. You interfered in a federal operation. I prevented a massacre, Emily said. In a hospital. He turned to the captain. Is that accurate? Yes, sir, the captain said, and she exposed compromised assets. The general's eyes returned to Emily. You've caused complications. Good, she replied. That means people will have to answer questions. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. You don't understand the scale of what you're poking. I understand, Emily said. I've been on the receiving end of it. Silence stretched. The general exhaled slowly. Michael Reeves is en route to a black site facility, he said. Secure. Off-grid. Emily shook her head. That won't hold. His eyes narrowed. Excuse me. You'll disappear him, she said. Or they'll find him. Either way, the truth dies. The captain stiffened. Sir, the general raised a hand. Enough. He studied Emily again, longer this time. What do you want? She didn't hesitate. Public exposure. Independent prosecutors. Chain of custody locked. And protection for Reeves that doesn't answer to anyone on that list. The general's lips pressed thin. You're asking for a war. I'm asking for accountability, she shot back. You taught us that word. A beat, then another. The general looked around the room, the screens, the agents, the evidence stacking higher by the second. He saw the reality he could no longer outrun. Do you know what happens to people who force the system to look at itself? He asked quietly. Emily nodded. They get targeted. And you're prepared for that. She thought of the ward. The patients. The nurse who'd whispered thanks. Mason's shaking hands. The life she'd tried to live quietly. I already was, she said. The general closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, the decision was made. Stand up, a special counsel, he ordered. Immediate. Freeze accounts, lock down access, and move Reeves to a joint civilian-military medical facility with rotating oversight. The captain blinked. Sir, now the general snapped. He turned back to Emily. This doesn't make you safe. She nodded. It makes it right. He hesitated, then extended his hand. Emily looked at it for a moment before taking it. Sergeant, he said softly, you did your duty. She released his hand. I did my job. Outside dawn crept toward the horizon, pale light bleeding into the night. The hospital breathed again, wounded but standing. And in the quiet that followed, Emily understood something with painful clarity. The storm hadn't passed. It had only changed direction. Morning arrived without permission. Grey light seeped through narrow windows and bounced off sterile walls, revealing the damage the night had tried to hide. Cracked fixtures, scuffed floors, dried blood hastily cleaned but not forgotten. Mercy Valley Medical Center looked the same on the surface, yet everything beneath it had shifted. Emily sat alone in an exam room, her shoulder freshly bandaged, an ice pack melting against her collarbone. The pain was dull, now manageable. The kind you could ignore if you had to. She had always had to. A knock sounded at the door. Come in, she said. Mason stepped inside, moving like someone afraid to make noise. He held 2 cups of coffee, one trembling slightly in his hand. I figured, he said quietly, setting one down beside her. You probably haven't slept. Emily gave a faint smile. Habit. He hesitated, then sat across from her. For a moment, neither spoke. The hospital hummed around them, pages overhead, gurneys rolling, life reasserting itself. They're saying the story won't go public yet, Mason said finally. Admin's calling it a security incident. Emily took a slow sip of coffee. That won't last. No, he agreed. But people are scared. So am I, she said simply. That surprised him. You don't look it. She met his eyes. That's the problem. Before he could respond, the door opened again. This time it was the captain, his expression tight, his uniform jacket slung over one shoulder like a burden. We have movement, he said, and not the kind we wanted. Emily straightened. Reeves, still airborne, he replied. But we intercepted chatter. Someone leaked the new destination. Her jaw tightened. Already. Mason stood abruptly. I thought you shut this down. We shut down a lot, the captain said. Not everything. He turned to Emily. They're adapting. So will we, she replied. He studied her for a moment. That's the problem. Every time you step in, you escalate the stakes. She didn't look away. Every time I don't, people die. Silence fell between them. The captain exhaled. We're moving Reeves again. Ground transport this time. Less visible. Emily shook her head. Predictable. He frowned. We can't keep flying him around. You can't keep announcing moves through compromised channels either, she shot back. You want him alive. You make it boring. The captain rubbed his jaw. What are you suggesting? She stood, ignoring the protest from her shoulder. You let me take him. Mason stared at her. You can't be serious. The captain laughed, once short and humorless. Absolutely not. Emily stepped closer, lowering her voice. No badges, no convoys, no official routes. A civilian medical transfer with 1 driver and 1 nurse. That's insane, Mason said. That's invisible, Emily corrected. The captain's eyes searched her face. You'd be the nurse. Yes. And the driver, she paused. Someone you trust. He shook his head. I trust very few people right now. Then trust me, she said. Another long pause. Finally, the captain sighed. If this goes wrong, it already has, Emily said. This just gives him a chance. The decision settled like a weight. 2 hours, the captain said. After that, I can't protect you from the fallout. Emily nodded. I don't need protection. Mason's voice broke. What about you? What happens when this is over? Emily looked at him, really looked at him. The fear, the respect, the questions. He didn't know how to ask. I'll come back, she said, if there's something left to come back to. 2 hours later, an unmarked ambulance idled at the far edge of the hospital grounds. Emily climbed into the back, adjusting the stretcher straps as Michael Reeves lay pale but conscious beneath a thin blanket. His eyes followed her movements. You're doing this again, he said quietly. She met his gaze. Last time. You said that before. She allowed herself a small, tired smile. I'm allowed to hope. The doors slammed shut. The engine rumbled to life. As the ambulance pulled onto the road, Emily watched the hospital recede through the rear windows, white walls, blinking lights, a place that had tried to be her refuge. The radio crackled. "All clear," the driver said. "Route is clean." Emily leaned back, eyes scanning the mirrors, the road, the reflections in the glass. Every shadow felt alive. Every passing car carried potential. They drove in silence for miles. Then the radio crackled again. "Change of plans," a voice said. Not the driver's. Emily's blood went cold. "Say again," she demanded. Static. Then laughter, soft, distorted. "You didn't really think we'd let you walk him out," the voice said. "Did you, Ranger?" Emily closed her eyes for half a second. When she opened them, the calm was back. "Driver," she said, "evenly pull over at the next turnout." What he asked. "Why?" Because she replied, reaching beneath the stretcher and gripping the hidden handle she'd installed herself. "We're about to be intercepted." The ambulance slowed. Ahead, black SUVs emerged from a side road, engines, growling headlights cutting through the morning haze. Michael's breathing quickened. "Emily," she squeezed his hand. "Stay with me." The ambulance rolled to a stop. Doors flew open. Men poured out weapons, raised faces hidden behind sunglasses and masks. Emily stepped out slowly, hands visible. "This ends now," one of them called. "Walk away." She looked at the road stretching empty in both directions, at the trees lining the ditch, at the sky pale and indifferent. "No," she said. Behind her, the ambulance's engine revved suddenly. The driver slammed the gas, the vehicle lurching forward. Gunfire erupted. Emily dove back inside, yanking the doors shut as bullets tore into metal, shattering glass. The ambulance fishtailed tires, screaming. Emily braced herself over Michael, shielding him as the world spun. "Hold on!" she shouted. The ambulance burst through the blockade, clipping an SUV and sending it spinning into the ditch. Sirens wailed too late. They sped down the road, battered but moving. Behind them, smoke rose. Emily panted, adrenaline surging. Michael stared at her in awe and terror. They won't stop. Emily wiped blood from her brow, eyes locked on the narrowing strip of road ahead. "I know," she said, and as the ambulance disappeared into the distance, one truth rang louder than the sirens chasing them. This fight was no longer about exposure. It was about survival. The ambulance screamed down the highway, its siren wailing into the open morning. Emily crouched low in the back, one knee braced against the bench, one arm locked over Michael Reeves's chest as the vehicle swerved violently. Shattered glass glittered across the floor like ice. Wind howled through the blown-out side window, dragging the smell of burned rubber and gunpowder inside. Pressures dropping, the driver shouted from the cab. "I see it," Emily replied, already moving. She pressed gauze against Michael's shoulder, where a shard of glass had cut him during the impact. Blood seeped through her fingers, warm and slick. Michael grimaced, teeth clenched, but didn't cry out. "You're not dying today," she said firmly. "Not on my watch." Behind them, engines roared. Emily risked a glance through the rear window. 2 SUVs remained, one damaged, limping but stubborn, the other intact, closing the distance with predatory patience. "They're pacing us," the driver said, panic creeping into his voice. "They're waiting." "For what?" Michael gasped. "For traffic," Emily answered. "For civilians." The road ahead curved toward a small town, gas stations, diners, a school zone sign flashing yellow. Emily's mind raced. If the contractors followed them into town, people would die. If they stopped, Michael would be executed. If they turned back, they'd be boxed in. She needed a break in the pattern. "Take the next exit," she ordered. "That's a dead-end service road," the driver protested. "Exactly." He hesitated, then obeyed. The ambulance veered off the highway, bouncing hard as it hit the ramp. The SUVs followed without slowing. The service road narrowed quickly, asphalt cracking into gravel. Trees closed in on both sides, branches scraping metal as the ambulance barreled forward. "They're still coming," the driver shouted. Emily moved to the rear doors, ripping open an emergency compartment. Inside was a flare gun, a fire extinguisher, and a toolbox. She grabbed the extinguisher and yanked the pin. "On my count," she said. "Hard brake." "What?" "3," she said, voice ironclad. 2. The intact SUV surged, closer grille filling the rear window. 1. The driver slammed the brakes. The ambulance lurched violently. Emily rolled with it, bracing as the pursuing SUV skidded forward, momentum carrying it dangerously close. She threw the rear doors open and blasted the extinguisher straight into the SUV's windshield. A cloud of white foam exploded outward, blinding the driver instantly. The SUV swerved, clipped the shoulder, and slammed sideways into a stand of trees with a bone-rattling crash. Emily slammed the doors shut and staggered back, chest heaving. "One left," the driver said, voice shaking. The damaged SUV roared past the wreckage, anger replacing caution. It accelerated, ramming the ambulance from behind. Metal screamed. The vehicle fishtailed, nearly tipping. Michael cried out. Emily crawled forward, gripping the gurney. "Stay with me, eyes on me." She scanned the road ahead. A narrow bridge appeared through the trees, old wooden, weight-limited. "Don't slow down," she told the driver. "Hit the bridge at speed. That thing won't hold." "It will," Emily said. Once, the ambulance thundered onto the bridge planks, rattling beneath the weight. The SUV followed, engines screaming, too committed to back off. Halfway across, Emily grabbed the flare gun. "Now," she shouted. The driver swerved hard left. Emily fired. The flare streaked backward, a bright red arc smashing through the SUV's windshield and igniting inside the cab. Flames erupted instantly. The SUV slammed the bridge railing, splintering wood, then broke through and plunged into the shallow ravine below with a deafening crash. Silence followed, broken only by the ambulance's engine and Emily's ragged breathing. They cleared the bridge and skidded to a stop. The driver stared ahead, stunned. "It's over." Emily didn't answer. She was already back at Michael's side, checking his pulse, his breathing. He was pale, weak, but alive. "You did it," he whispered. "We did," she corrected. Sirens approached in the distance, real ones this time. State troopers, local sheriff. Emily felt the tension in her chest ease slightly, just enough to feel the weight of exhaustion slam into her bones. The ambulance doors burst open moments later. Uniformed officers flooded the scene, weapons raised, voices sharp and confused. "Hands where we can see them." Emily raised her hands slowly. "Patient needs immediate care," she said. Multiple attackers neutralized. One vehicle down in the ravine. A trooper stared at the wreckage behind them, eyes wide. "Jesus." They loaded Michael onto a new stretcher, this time surrounded by flashing lights and uniforms that weren't part of any secret chain. As they worked, the captain's voice came through Emily's earpiece, breathless, relieved. "We saw it on traffic cams," he said. "You're clear. State custody from here." Emily closed her eyes briefly. "Lock it down. Every report. Every body." "It's already happening," he replied. "You broke the cycle." She opened her eyes as medics wheeled Michael toward a waiting helicopter, this one clearly marked painfully public. Michael reached out, catching her sleeve. "You didn't have to go this far." "Yes," she said softly. "I did." He searched her face. "What will you do now?" Emily watched the rotors spin up the wind, tugging at her blood-stained scrubs. She thought of the ward, the night shift, the quiet she'd tried to hide inside. "I'll finish what I started," she said, "and then I'll decide." The helicopter lifted, banking away into the morning sky. Emily stood alone on the roadside, the bridge behind her, smoking the past, finally catching up, and the future wide open and dangerous. For the first time in years, she felt something like peace, not because the fight was over, but because she had chosen it on her terms. The sun was fully up by the time Emily returned to Mercy Valley Medical Center. Morning traffic crawled past the hospital entrance, commuters sipping coffee, unaware that less than 24 hours earlier, armed men had stormed these halls. The building looked the same, clean glass, fluttering flags, the soft churn of automatic doors, but Emily felt the difference immediately. The quiet had weight now. Inside, the hospital buzzed with controlled chaos. Administrators huddled in tight circles. Federal agents lingered near elevators, trying and failing to look invisible. A handwritten sign taped to the nurse's station read, "Thank you, night staff." Emily walked past it without stopping. Her shoulder ached with every step. The adrenaline that had carried her through the chase had burned off, leaving exhaustion in its wake. Each breath felt earned. Each movement reminded her she was human again. Mason spotted her first. He froze mid-sentence, eyes widening, then pushed through the crowd toward her. "You came back." She nodded. "I said I would." He looked her over, bandage bruises, the faint tremor in her hands. "They said you were involved in a highway incident." "That's one way to put it," she said. Before he could respond, the captain appeared at her side. His uniform was rumpled now, his face drawn with fatigue, but his eyes were clear. "It's done," he said quietly. "Reeves made it to the joint facility. He's stable. Testimony is being recorded as we speak. Emily released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. And the leak, she asked. The captain's mouth tightened. Multiple arrests. 2 senior officials resigned overnight. Others are being escorted to places they didn't expect to see again. She nodded. Good. There's more, he added. The story broke. She turned to him sharply. Publicly. Within limits, he said. Enough that it can't be buried. Across the lobby, a television mounted near the waiting area flickered with breaking news. Emily caught a glimpse of her own reflection in the screen, grainy footage from the loading bay, her standing between armed men and a hospital door. The Chiron read whistleblower attack foiled by hospital staff. Not ranger, not soldier, staff. Emily looked away. The captain followed her gaze. Your name hasn't been released. Yet, she said. We can keep it that way, he offered. If you want. She considered it. The anonymity she had clung to for so long was still within reach, thin, fragile, but possible. Before she could answer, a familiar voice cut through the air. Emily. She turned. The nurse from room 414, the one who had whispered thanks, stood a few feet away, hands clasped tightly in front of her. Her eyes were red but steady. I just wanted to say, the woman said softly, my patient made it through the night. He keeps asking about the Blue Scrub's guardian. A ripple of quiet laughter moved through the nearby staff. Emily felt something tighten in her chest. I was just doing my job, she said. The nurse shook her head. No, you did more. Emily looked around, the nurses who had hidden patients, the interns who had finally understood the weight of responsibility, Mason standing taller than he had the day before. Maybe the truth didn't need her name attached. The captain cleared his throat. There's a formal debrief scheduled. And there's an offer. She raised an eyebrow. Of course there is. Consulting role, he said. Advisory. Training hospital security on crisis response. You'd have clearance. Resources. Emily considered it. The old pull, the familiar rhythm of planning preparedness command. And the strings, she asked. He met her gaze honestly. There are always strings. She nodded. Then no, he didn't look surprised. Thought you might say that. Mason stepped closer, lowering his voice. So what happens to you now? Emily looked toward the elevators that led back to the ward, back to the night shift, back to the life she had chosen when she thought hiding was the same as healing. I finish my shift, she said. Mason blinked. You're serious. She smiled faintly. Patients don't stop needing care because the world got loud. He shook his head in disbelief. You're unbelievable. No, she said gently. I'm a nurse. The captain watched her for a long moment, then extended his hand again. This time she took it without hesitation. If you ever change your mind, he began. I know where to find you, she finished. As he walked away, Emily turned toward the elevators. Mason followed, still processing. Inside the ward, the lights were brighter, now the air warmer. The beeping monitors had returned to their steady, reassuring cadence. A night shift nurse handed off a chart, her voice calm, professional. Room 417 is empty, she said. Patient transferred. Emily nodded. Thank you. She stepped into the room anyway. The bed was gone, fresh sheets neatly folded, the machines silent. Sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating a space that had been the center of everything. She stood there for a moment alone, letting the stillness settle. Her phone buzzed softly in her pocket. A single message. Unknown number. They won't forget you. Be ready. Emily slipped the phone away without replying. She had lived with that knowledge for years. Back at the nurse's station, Mason watched her chart vitals, adjust medication times, and speak gently to a frightened patient, like nothing extraordinary had happened. Finally, he couldn't hold it in anymore. Emily, he said quietly after everything. Aren't you afraid? She paused, meeting his eyes. Yes, she said honestly. But fear isn't a stop sign. It's a compass. He frowned. How so? It tells you what matters, she replied. A page echoed overhead. Another patient needed help. Emily picked up her clipboard and moved. As she walked down the hallway past rooms she had defended past people, who now looked at her with something between awe and respect, she felt the weight of who she was, settle into something solid. She didn't need a uniform. She didn't need a title. Because when the moment came, she had stood her ground. And that was enough. But somewhere beyond the hospital walls, in rooms far from daylight, others were still counting their losses, and they were still watching her. Night returned to Mercy Valley Medical Center with a strange sense of symmetry. The day had been loud press briefings outside the gates, administrators fielding calls, federal vehicles arriving and leaving in waves. By the time the sun dipped below the skyline, exhaustion had dulled everything to a quiet hum. Emily was back on nights. The same pale blue scrubs, the same fourth-floor ward, the same steady rhythm of machines keeping time for fragile lives. But nothing felt the same. She moved through the hallway with a calm that now carried weight. Conversations hushed when she passed, not out of fear but awareness. People had seen what she did when chaos came knocking. They knew now that calm wasn't softness, it was strength under control. In room 409, a teenager recovering from surgery flinched when Emily entered. She smiled gently, lowering her voice, explaining every movement before she touched a thing. The boy relaxed. His mother mouthed thank you from the chair beside the bed. In room 412, an elderly man asked if she was the nurse from the news. Emily adjusted his IV and shook her head. "I'm just your nurse." He smiled anyway. "That's enough." At 211 a.m., the hospital settled into its deepest quiet. Emily stood at the nurse's station reviewing charts. Mason sat nearby, scribbling notes, still adjusting to the new gravity of his role. He watched her for a moment before speaking. "They're moving forward with charges," he said quietly. "Big ones." Emily nodded without looking up. "Good. And your name?" he asked. She paused, then set her pen down. "It won't be on the headlines, but people will figure it out. Eventually." He studied her. "You okay with that?" Emily thought of Kandahar, of folded flags, of a life she'd tried to outpace by becoming smaller than she really was. "I'm okay with the truth," she said. The clock ticked over to 217 a.m. She felt it before she heard it, a subtle shift in the air, a tightening at the base of her skull. Not danger. Not yet. Attention. Her phone vibrated in her pocket. Once. She didn't reach for it immediately. Mason noticed. "Everything okay?" Emily met his eyes. "Probably." She stepped away from the desk and checked the message. "You closed one door. Others are opening. We'll be in touch." No signature. She deleted it, slipping the phone back into her pocket. Mason exhaled. "That doesn't sound probably." Emily offered a faint smile. "It's manageable." Down the hall, the elevator chimed softly. A pair of federal agents stepped out, new faces this time. They nodded to the staff and continued toward administration, blending into the machinery of oversight that would linger here for months. Emily watched them go, then turned back to her rounds. In room 417, the bed was still empty. She paused there longer than necessary. Sunlight earlier had made the room feel like a beginning. Now, under the muted glow of night, it felt like an ending, cleaned, closed, resolved. She touched the doorframe once, then moved on. At 3:04 a.m., a code blue was called 2 floors down. Emily responded without hesitation, running alongside staff who no longer questioned her pace or her presence. She gave instructions clearly, calmly, hands steady as they brought a patient back from the edge. When it was over, when the room exhaled in relief, someone whispered, "Thank God you were here." Emily washed her hands, the water warm against her skin. "You all did the work," she said, but they watched her like they knew better. Later, alone in the break room, Emily sat with a cup of coffee she didn't intend to finish. The window reflected her back at herself, older than she'd been, yesterday lighter in a way she hadn't expected. She thought about the offer she'd refused, the paths reopening in front of her, the system she'd forced into the light, knowing full well it would remember her name even if the public didn't. She wasn't invisible anymore, and she wasn't running. Her phone vibrated again. This time the message was shorter. "Stand by." Emily stared at it for a long moment. Then she locked the screen. When dawn finally crept in, she ended her shift like any other, handing off charts, wishing the day nurse luck slipping on her jacket. As she walked out through the automatic doors, the cool morning air hit her face. Reporters were gone now. Federal vehicles too. Just the parking lot, half full, ordinary and quiet. Emily crossed it alone. At her car, she paused, looking back at the hospital, at the windows, the helipad, the place where she had finally stopped pretending she could separate who she was from what she did. She opened the door and got in. As the engine started, she caught her reflection in the rearview mirror. a nurse, a ranger, a guardian who no longer needed to choose just one. Emily drove away as the sun rose fully over Mercy Valley, casting long shadows behind her. Whatever came next, she would meet it the same way she always had, calm, prepared, unseen until it mattered most. Some of the strongest people in the world don't wear uniforms anymore. They don't announce who they are or what they've survived. They work quiet shifts, take overlooked roles, and let others underestimate them until a moment arrives that demands everything they have. Emily's story isn't about violence or heroics. It's about responsibility, about choosing to act when staying silent would be easier, about understanding that your past doesn't disappear just because you change your life, but it can be transformed into something that saves others instead of destroying you. True strength isn't loud. It doesn't need recognition. It shows up when fear is present and says, "I'm still going to do what's right." If this story moved you, let us know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. And if you believe that quiet courage deserves to be seen, consider subscribing. There are more stories like this waiting to be told.